We appreciate you being on. We have lots of different kinds of people on the call today. We have people from the state agency. We've got districts of all shapes and sizes from across the state. We have people from nonprofits that all come to join us. We deeply appreciate you doing that today. So I'm going to pull up the slides, and we can go from there. Let's make sure I've got it right. My name is Brad Mitchell. I work with Generation Schools Network as a consultant. I work with national rural schools from across the nation, as well as urban and suburban and state agencies in the federal government. And I will be kind of driving this ship to make sure that we get in on time. Kirk, will you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Kirk Banghart. I'm the Vice President of Generation Schools Network and the Chief Facilitator of the Colorado Rural Collaborative. And so as we get going, one of the things we wanted to do is talk a little bit just to give you a background of what GSN is. So GSN is a educational innovator for the last 15 years. We've really focused at the beginning around new school models. We also have worked very closely in developing successful turnaround work for schools across Colorado and other states. And then the last 5 years, part of what we really focus on, and it's that chief facilitator role that I play, is that we've been key in the Colorado Rural Education Collaborative, which is now 70 school districts across Colorado. I see a lot of familiar faces on the call of member districts, so thank you all for joining. One of the things that's exciting about the Rural Collaborative is over the last 5 years, we've been able to leverage over $22 million to be able to come into our 70 districts across the state. And so we're able to do quite a few things in that area to help support districts with their problems of practice in doing that.
Oops. Sorry, I need to go back here a second. I got ahead on the slides.
So some of the areas that we just wanted to bring forward that we focus on so folks know a little bit more is that as a nonprofit, one of the things that GSN does is help districts around retaining and getting grants and supporting them. We have a whole grants team that works with districts. One of the things that we always say is that key for us is really coming alongside districts. We're not a nonprofit that likes to come in and drop something on the plate of districts. What we'd like to do is come alongside, be able to work with administrations, principals, teachers, and be able to really see what is the best fit. Some of the areas that we do that in is around being able to help support districts around diagnostic reviews to be able to determine what are the root cause, the ground level realities that they're facing. We also have a very robust SEL program that we focus on, that we actually have from K-12 that helps support. We do that not only by having a curriculum, but we have embedded coaches that help support teachers with their social emotional learning programs for their teachers and professional development or for their students. And then we also have one for adults that we work through. We also bring professional educators to help systems around the level 2 and the level tier, or the tier 2 and the tier 3 strategies for the most at-risk students. And then we help schools develop really strong climate and culture. So that's a little bit about Generation Schools Network and the collaborative that we do. But today we want to talk a little bit more about where we're going in the next year.
So thanks, Kirk. And as we go along, please use the chat box if you have any comments or questions. Our colleague, Allie, will be tracking the chat box, and she'll interrupt me every once in a while and say, here are some questions or comments that we'd like to deal with. We'd like to make this as interactive as possible. And so this really isn't about Generation Schools Network. What this is really about, just like you guys, the last year, 14, 15 months, we've been looking at where education and schooling is going and all the various things that are taking place, and have great sensitivity to your lives and how often you've had to adapt and how often you've had to change and plan and moving forward. But we actually think in the next 4 or 5, 6 months, because of ESSER consolidated plans due, ESSER I, ESSER II, Rescue Act, Potential Infrastructure Act possibilities, other state and federal programming. You guys know better than we do that in the next 4 or 5 months, this is a considerable planning time with once in a lifetime resources that are coming into play. And how are you planning for the next 2 or 3 years to take those additional resources, consolidate them as best you can, coordinate them around a plan of change and transformation that fits your local community and fits your priorities. And so we wanted to talk about some stuff that we've been doing to help districts plan either individually or collaborative moving forward. And this slide here is particularly important because I think one of the philosophies that GSN approaches is that instead of thinking about designing the system so that the child can get through the system according to the system needs, what we've been trying to do for the last 20, 25 years with standards-based education. It's also important, particularly in a time of COVID and what we've learned from remote learning and the need for self-directed learning to be really critically important, that we need to prepare the child for the road and not necessarily the road for the child. Because you've all learned in the last year, we've changed that road many times with the ups and downs of COVID as we move forward. And so when we look at preparing the child for the road, particularly during these times, the issue of mental and physical wellness and health, not only for the students, but also for the educators that are serving them. The amount of stress, the amount of trauma, the amount of wellness challenges that many districts have faced over the last 14, 15 months, loneliness, isolation, a variety of things like that. So, what are we doing to coordinate our wellness systems of support beyond vaccines, beyond safe environments, but really trying to deal with the physical and mental wellness issues moving forward, the social emotional learning issues moving forward? So, in our planning for the next 2 or 3 years, with the resources that will be available, what are we doing there? Secondly, relationships. I think if there's anything I've learned from COVID, it is the power of social learning, the power of relationships, and you can see the differences in social capital when you get into the kids' lives by seeing their environments on their Zoom calls. And so, how do we develop social capital for kids and the ability to be able to learn together, even if it is in technologically related formats in moving forward? So how do we deal with growing strong social capital relationships? And then the last thing, if anything, when I talk to people, superintendents and teacher leaders across the country, they talk most about what they've learned is how we need to better support self-directed learning. Whether it's in a hybrid approach, in a total remote approach, in a face-to-face approach, the self-directed learning has become more and more important. So how we coordinate our planning around wellness, social capital relations, and relationships and self-direction is very, very important for moving forward. So Kirk's going to talk a little bit about in the planning processes in the variety of places that we work with urban, suburban, rural districts. What are some of kind of the new planning road rules that we are facing? Kirk?
Yeah, so I think as we look at the road forward, we feel like there's really 5 areas that districts need to focus on and look at and get support in. And the first one is that we really need to, as we're coming out of this time of COVID, really assess what our current position of our school community is. And so a lot of this ties around being able to look at what is our root cause, what's currently happening, and then being able to help support the best way to do that. And that leads us to the second one, which is about understanding your best leverage points. We know with these new dollars that there's lots of options to do. The question really comes down to what is your best leverage point, and being able to determine what is best for your community is really key in the way to use those dollars. So is this about how we go after our most at-risk students? Is this about how we determine social emotional learning and how that's going to be embedded into it? Those are all to be determined, and those really come out of that. How do we assess what our current position is, and then how do we leverage those? The third one that we really believe in is about partnership and who you can rely on to collaborate with. And this may be, in our case, a intermediary, but we also know this is true for your neighboring districts, your state agencies, other nonprofits. But as we go into this time, this lift that we're all facing is going to be huge. And to do it solo is going to be really a challenge. And so we really believe strongly that having the right partners and the right collaboration is key in making your outcomes and your goals actually happen. The fourth one is really with these new funds is how do we optimize those resources to be able to identify where to go. Brad's going to talk here a little bit about helping a tool we've got to help you align all these different funding sources. I think one of the things that we know is that for many years, there's been a traditional way that we've used federal support. And this is really one of the things that we believe in is now's the time to really look at how we're using those resources and be able to determine, are they aligned to the best impact for your students? And then finally, the last one is to have a good plan. We know that all good intentions may not lead to where you want to go unless you have that plan. And so you need to really create that roadmap for where you're going and how do we leverage that out of how do you assess what are the right leverage points, and then who are your partners to be able to do that to optimize those funds.
Thanks, Kirk. Again, please put any comments, questions in the chat box because the conversation is really important. And Ali, just to give you a heads up, for some reason my chat box is not working, so interrupt me at any time as we move forward. Thank you. So this is a key thing, and we're going to send this out to you if you'd like this. We, in working around the country, have worked with districts over the last 3 or 4 months and have developed this kind of fairly easy spreadsheet to help people bring together all their various resources, federal and state, and try to put it in a consolidated plan that makes sense, not just for the accountability reasons, like with your ESSA plan, but a plan, a working plan, a roadmap, as Kirk talks about it, that you can use over the next 3 or 4 years as your systems are going through tipping point changes and moving forward. So we've found that this tool and the people we've worked with have found this tool pretty friendly, pretty easy to use to provide realistic, coherent, effective, and fair, sustainable planning on moving forward. So I just want to highlight a couple things about this. And again, we will send this out to you. If you look at the left-hand column, it's the classic fundamental elements that are in an ESSA consolidated plan. The basic diagnostic review, being able to identify what are your needs and priorities over the next 2 or 3 years moving forward. A second row there, you see stakeholder involvement. How are you involving the various voices and diversity of voices included in planning for that? And what can often happen on our siloed planning approach, we will have some voices dealing with the ESSA planning stuff, Title I, whatever, and then maybe something for ESSER, and then maybe something for the Rescue Act, and that they don't always coordinate and come together. And so this tool helps us bring all the voices together across the silos. So that makes sure we have voices included in the planning and that they can learn from each other. Third one, intervention, which is the bread and butter of the systems and supports that address identified needs and priorities. What is the proposed solution? And then if you move into the middle where it says integrated solution priorities, the kind of the next 5 or 6 columns, we've just identified by working with people around the country, these seem to be the most hot topic issues, pain points that people are wrestling with in terms of how can we have integrated solutions to these things. So you can see the titles, wellness, we talked about that earlier. Learning loss, as you all know, is a big topic and is slightly a controversial topic about how do you define it, what does it mean? If you really put kids back in an accelerated remediation program in summer and fall, will that actually exacerbate the problem or help the problem? But learning loss is there, and we know from recent federal legislation, at least 20% of new resources have to be devoted to learning loss, and so that can be very, very critical in moving forward. Student disengagement. If there's anything we've learned, is a lot of kids that were on the edges have kind of been pushed out. We can't even find them in some districts anymore. And that tier 3 kid in particular, and how do you re-engage them, particularly when there's these issues of mental health or issues of disengagement due to the technical formats that are being used. Educator shortages. We all have heard the stories about not having enough subs, about not having just basic folks to be able to person the ships in moving forward. And then the last one, which really comes up a lot, is school to work transition. Because we've kind of had this year where some people have not gone on to post-secondary education to the normal flow and a changing economy, there's been more and more talk about how we're preparing kids for community and career connected learning so that at the end of a high school, they may not necessarily go into a post-secondary flow, but maybe go straight to work or a combination of those things. And how do we use these resources that we've got over the next 2 or 3 years to kind of deal with more successful school to work transitions? Ali, I see you nodding your head.
Yep, Brad, so somebody dropped in. We were just talking about some common pain points that are on their radar for the next school year. And if anybody else wants to drop in some of the things that you're thinking about, Matthew Snyder shared that county health has a different opinion than the school community regarding COVID mitigation.
Absolutely. That's part of those little stakeholder voices. And then parents have a different point of view on that. Employers have a different point of view on that. And I'm sure Matthew has felt the pain point for that often. So yes, the point that he's raising is these 5 are not written in stone. You can change them, but what are kind of the core driving changes that you're dealing with over the next 3 or 4 years that really matter. We have just found around the country, these 5 keep coming and they cluster. And so you see here, we just used a sample of approach that we used with one district. And so you see under diagnostic review, under wellness, people said we really need to have trauma-informed care. Under learning loss, we need to reduce the number or percentage of tier 3 students that face major learning loss issues. And they've identified their key issues in moving forward. And then as you see going down, particularly under the third column, the interventions that they'd like to do in moving forward. And then the last 2 rows, program evaluation. When we often talk to state agency folks, they talk about if there's any way we could improve consolidated planning, it's the evaluation part, the continuous improvement part, and how that can really be valuable data and just not compliance accountability driven, but actually organizational effectiveness approach is really important. And what resources could we use to beef up evaluation that is relevant, that's meaningful, that's smart. Then the last one are always the equity issues. How do we help educators and staff make the solution work for everyone moving forward? And then this template essentially says, as you can see going across, how do we do those 5 core elements of planning? How does that relate to the key integrated solutions we need to deal with? And then you go down under ESSER resources. What resources might be able to be taken out of Title I, Part A, Title II, Part A, to try to deal with any specific solution that's being proposed? ESSER I, ESSER II, the rescue stimulus, and then you can add other columns with other resources that come into play. That could be philanthropic dollars. That could be, if you're a rural district, your REAP dollars in moving forward. So just give you a highlight of that third element, intervention, systems of supports that address identified needs and priorities. Here is, again, is an example of how we worked with one district of how they ran that. What I'd like to highlight by that is you notice under wellness, learning loss, student disengagement, shortage, and school to work, this district, in fact, it was actually 5 districts, said, can we partner together with some of our resources and pay for a student and community wellness coordinator to help coordinate the variety of approaches to community-centered learning centers, as well as relationships with the health department, as it was talked earlier, moving forward. And they were able to say, hey, for the next 2 years, through rescue stimulus monies and ESSER monies, we could actually pay for a full-time coordinator that could do the heavy lifting on this and get it coordinated. And it could be tied around our trauma-informed assessment program, bring in an SEL advisory program, real-world problem scenario thing, which is a tool that school to work transition people will use to have classroom-based, work-based learning in partnership with classrooms with the local employers. And so they looked at how they could take one-time monies, create an infrastructure of support to build out their integrated solutions so that it could be sustainable in 2 or 3 years. They would not have necessarily connected those dots if they hadn't used the template tool to see how they could see the coordinated points. The other thing we often do with districts is they'll do this individually, and then if they want to partner with local districts or contiguous districts with themselves, they actually can come together in a work session and lay out their templates and go, look, we have these common pain points. Look, we have these common solutions. Might we be able to leverage? And that particularly plays well in the evaluation component, where they actually can be peer evaluators with each other moving forward and can use some of their peer evaluation dollars or evaluation dollars to make that go smoothly. Allie,
Brad,
you got something?
so we had
Yes.
another one jump in that's actually kind of a perfect segue based on what you're talking about. And Paul, thanks for sharing that. I don't know if you want to talk to it specifically, but basically what Paul shared, Brad, was that sustainability of the efforts beyond 2023 is a concern when they're spending on cleaning supplies, counselors, instructional paras, smaller classes. So that idea of collaboration, helping sustain some of these initiatives. And Paul, I don't know if there's anything you want to add, but that was another point that kind of ties in perfectly to what you were mentioning about collaboration and sustainability.
Paul, do you want to add anything to that? Go ahead, please.
Sure. I think, on recent conversations, it's, try to spend the most this current fiscal year. Well, all of our current expenses are covered, and then, taper off a little bit next year, and then have the smallest portion the third year out to not create this fiscal cliff into 2024. And I think we're really looking at trying to spread it out over the next 2 to 3 years as evenly as we can to just cover some of these additional costs for as long as possible without really creating a ton of additional things that we can't, not creating stuff that's going to have to go away
Right.
That's the hardest thing, is how do you respond without the just going into it knowing, well, this is going to go away as soon as this funding ends. So
No, that's a great point, Paul. And the example that we see on the slide kind of deals with that. So that sustainability choice, and the smaller the district, the more remote the district, the more difficult that can become. So the classic traditional wisdom is the plan you just said, and to try to cover the basics and not put yourself too much over your skis, and then be able to have a sustainability plan. That's the very reason why these districts went with the coordinator, because they thought we can afford a coordinator for 2 years because of the ESSER I, ESSER II, and some state monies. And that part of that coordinator role could be resource generation, connecting with regional hospitals around mental health issues, stuff, so that they could connect with local philanthropy community foundations, and so could actually generate a sustainability plan around the programming that was developed, because they were fully planning that they were not going to have a coordinator in 2 years. But 2 years of a coordinator really pulling this together could help deal with the sustainability issue, as an example of that. But Paul, you're dead on. This is the number one reason why the template is valuable. How can we risk manage and cover the basics, fear of a funding cliff in 2 or 3 years, supplement and not supplant, but then also take advantage of making some transformative moves that will ultimately make us more sustainable. Paul, does that make sense in any way?
yeah, for sure. I think this template would be very helpful if used fully. Actually
that's
use
that's
the
a really
correct
good point.
information on it.
And,
Be
and
very
Kirk will,
helpful.
Kirk will talk later about used fully when you're harried and hassled in the time for this. We'd actually be very helpful to set up some webinars or some phone calls to help people get this done. And we have found with peer accountability that if you say, here's the template, a little one-on-one coaching from GSN, and then let's get 3 or 4 districts together, they kind of show up with a template. Or at least a sketch of their template. And then that webinar around the template helps them fill that out even further. But you're dead on. Where do we find the time and space to get this template done is important. Kirk, do you want to say anything to that?
No, I agree with what we said. I think as we do it, part of it is how do we hold to fidelity as things constantly change. One of the things that we found, especially with the collaboration piece that we do a lot of, is the ability for us to hold each other accountable as peers, as colleagues, is usually fairly helpful in it. It's the carrot without being the hammer, those kind of things. And so I think that we see a lot of times when we're doing collaborative work, it helps move us forward down the road quite quickly. So I think it's something that we see as a real positive in the way to help support each other with our colleagues and move our systems forward to really support our community and our students.
And the other thing our district partners say is, hell, we got to do this anyway. We got to turn our asset consolidated plan in the next 2 or 3 months, and we could do the paint by numbers approach, look at last year's plan, couple of numbers, move forward, or we could take this moment to say, could we be a little more strategic with the sustainability issue of the long term coming into play? So it fits stuff that's got to be turned in anyway, but maybe it makes it more locally relevant and meaningful moving forward. So to go far, you go together. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And so we kind of want to open this up now in terms of where do you see Colorado schools going? Where can collaboration make a difference? How might GSN be able to be helpful in your coordinated planning and moving forward on these kind of things? And so let's just open it up, and you can either put in the chat box or you can unmute yourself, and you can share your thoughts about the possibilities here. So here's the dangerous time in a Zoom call where we open it up for conversation. So please, critical feedback, not relevant, don't understand it, doesn't make sense. Anything you want to share about this? Lisa's unmuted herself, but that might just be she's teasing me.
I guess I can speak a little more, just if no one else has anything. But I think for me, it's really just how many things are all kind of coming to decisions over the next, say, 45 days with, and really long term, multiple year impacts, along with union negotiations as far as raises, and there's just so many things happening to the budget. I don't fully understand how it's all going to shake out. To be honest, there's many things, as much of this that can be a general fund offset just due to continuity of operation. It has to be looked for, just in the fact of, we lost, say, $1 million was cut from a budget year over year. We're anticipating that next year is maybe back to last year's funding. Yet if we've given raises 2 consecutive years in a row, we're coming into that behind. So even similar funding isn't necessarily where we were at the time. So there's a lot of factors, a lot of change, and trying to make the most out of these dollars that'll impact the students' growth is truly critical. We currently have been kind of in a hybrid all winter, with where we added 17 additional class spaces, so every student could come in every single day, but it's been just kind of more of a daycare option, not necessarily a certified teacher on those off days. More outdoor programming and just somewhere for those kids to be, because we currently do not have any daycare available in the county. There's not a single licensed daycare provider. So it really comes down to the school as being that provider. If we're in red, everyone's at home, many of those kids are not going to be supervised by an adult. So it's very important to have a safe space available. And if we have to be 6 feet apart, that really limits the class size. And so even going into next year is the unknown, like, will we have to do this again, or are we planning for actual classes? And it's a tricky time for sure.
Paul, 2 follow-up questions. One, do you mind sharing what district you're from?
Lake County, Leadville. And it's very wide effort countywide to address the daycare as far as attracting, at-home providers, as well as getting a licensed daycare back. Actually could very well become a partnership where we have a shared role of some kind with the school district, just to assure that there is a licensed, actual functioning daycare space. Very likely would be in a school building. And that's all just getting created. So that's all new. We're building a new school, which will have an additional 2 extra classrooms for preschool as well, just to going from 6 up to 8 actual preschool classrooms to try and at least provide service to all 4-year-olds, and then loop in as many 3-year-olds for a 2-year preschool option as possible. But so there's a lot in the works. Funding it all is quite interesting, and honestly, with the windfall of these additional funds is great. But like my original comment was, how we have to be thinking of that 3rd and 4th year out already, and not intentionally setting ourselves up for a major
a cliff.
cut.
Yeah. So one other follow-up question, Paul, you've been great, is you put a lot of bricks in your cart, which I totally understand. So I'm going to throw one more brick and just get your point of view on this. The human capital dimension. So a lot of districts we work with, they're very concerned about who's coming back this fall, over the next 2 or 3 years, what's going to be the human capital base moving forward. From your ground level realities, how important is that? And do you see some of these resources like the Title II stuff and some of the Rescue Act stuff helping with your human capital teacher educator needs?
I think historically our district has had pretty significant turnover. More recently, it's gotten a lot better. Whether COVID will have much of an impact to that or not, we have some turnover, some known turnover, but not an unusual amount, or if it's still very reasonable, an anticipated or expected amount. So, but I think supporting counselors within the buildings, not only for the students, but it's those trained folks could also potentially have a better pulse of how the staff is doing and raise a red flag if there are issues that truly the adults in the building are as needed as the students.
Yeah.
Mental. So we definitely are making sure that is heavily, that's one of our top priorities, as well as just the like the special education assessments, and really ramping up some efforts there just to make sure that those students aren't left behind as well. It's you don't know until you really dig in deeper, and that's definitely something we've identified as being a priority as well. So
Appreciate it. Paul, Kirk, you were shaking your head. Did you want to add anything?
Oh no, I just was agreeing with Paul as he was saying it. Is I think the challenges that are listing out. I just am validating that, Paul. We're hearing that across the state of Colorado and also across the country as we work with different partners. And so I think part of what we're hoping that you can take away from this today is at least something tangible around the consolidated plan template that Brad was going over. And hopefully that can help you and your team and the community really be able to look at what are those needs, and then how can that sustainability be built into meeting those challenges that you're facing in Lake County.
I think the other thing we want to emphasize is we recognize you district folks on this webinar are getting inundated from vendors, and we don't think ourselves as vendors. We think of ourselves as partners. And one of the key issues we see is you can plug and play and buy a lot of stuff. You can come to GSN if you want to do an advisory program and you need a SEL curriculum. We certainly could help on that. But we think the critical moment right now over this next 6, 7 months, and then the conversation with Paul, I think it's amplifying that, is how can we help our district partners really deal with these planning issues, and then make wise uses of their resources for sustainable impact moving forward. And so that's why we think the tool and the thought partnership is important. And then the investment choices come into that. But too often, sometimes the investment choice is the lead versus the priority planning is the lead. Just because you don't have enough time, because you have too many stakeholders, it can be very difficult. But that's kind of the reason we wanted to have this conversation with you about make that difference. Who else has any thoughts or comments about anything we've talked about so far? Okay, the wait time was fairly significant, so I'll go to one final slide and we'll talk about next steps, and we'll go for there. If I can pull this upright, share screen again, aren't I being impressive? Okay, let's go. So again, if you're interested, we will send you this as part of a package of support based off some of the stuff we talked today in terms of the template and other things. This kind of is a nice one-page kind of summary of the ESSA requirements over the next 3 or 4 months, the ESSER requirements, and then other things that are following after ESSER and ESSA, the Rescue Act, the aspects of the Infrastructure Act that if it happens to come into play. And this is a busy graphic, but what it kind of points out is to under ESSA, you see the things that you have to do anyway, your needs, your priorities, stakeholder involvement, that left-hand column stuff. And then we kind of highlight the things that we could do that could be maybe helpful, our diagnostic review process, our ability to help you deliver and monitor evidence-based student support programming under that plan, meaningful ongoing consultation with parents, teachers, and community to make sure it's a community-owned plan. ESSER, as you know, is very similar to ESSA. Anything that ESSA authorized, ESSER monies can be focused on. But ESSER really tries to get at the learning loss. The Rescue Act really, as you know, gets at the learning loss too. So GSN does things in advocacy and SEL programs and multi-tiered and project-based learning support, health and wellness planning. One of the things that someone mentioned earlier about the relationship with their health department. One of the things GSN provides, again, it's a planning tool, is a health and wellness planning guide. in which in a 3-4 month period, you can really look at all your health and wellness issues, look at your current state, look at your future state, and try to develop a health and wellness plan that is sustainable and meaningful down the road. And again, that could be tied to the template in terms of resources you could use for your health and wellness plan moving forward. Because if you're like many of the districts that I've worked with over the last year, it has been fly by the seat of your pants, and to be able to step back a little bit and say, what's the overarching health and wellness plan, and what resources do we have to deal with that moving forward? Then the last column essentially talks about when you do this with other districts, there are some gains and some benefits. Everybody can do their root cause analysis alone, but if you're in a cluster of districts that are in a common economic region, common cultural region, you could do root cause analysis somewhat together. Everybody can do their own investments in evidence-based practices, or you could work together and say, we all want to go after trauma-informed care, this one approach. How might we coordinate our resources on that? And then again, the evaluation, how might we assess what's working, what's not working moving forward? And then ultimately, as we're talking about with Paul, the issues of long-term resources around the talent development, the community wellness issue, and what if there's a next pandemic? How do we deal with that? Economic development and the school to work transition. So trying to pull all this together in a meaningful way moving forward. The last slide, which Kirk is going to talk about, and then any final thoughts you might have, I'll pull it up. Okay, share. Kirk, last slide, which I will
Sure.
get to you here.
So I think as we go forward, what we want to do is, as far as hopeful possible next steps, is that we'll be reaching out to everybody on the call, being able to give you copies of the template, the visual Brad just showed, and other resources that we have that hopefully will help you look forward. At that time, if you'd like to schedule a follow-up meeting, we would be really happy to do that and see how we can help you, come alongside you and help really optimize what your planning could look like for the upcoming school year. So please look for some emails in the next couple of days, and we'll be reaching out to chat with you all. And so we're really hopeful that we can find a place that we can all continue to have this conversation and meet the needs of your school system and your students. And we really thank you for joining us today. But before we let you go, we'll just open it up to any further questions that people have.
And while we're doing that, I'm a big believer in interactivity and stuff as much as possible on these devices. So if you wouldn't mind on the chat box, if you're interested in getting that template and the support materials, could you just put in the chat box, please send materials? Because we don't want to force things on folks. And if you want a few days to think about it, that's fine too, and we can send it out automatically. But it'd be nice if you could use the chat feature and say, yeah, I find this a meaningful tool. I find this an important thing to move forward. Just put in the chat box that you'd like materials. So any other checkouts people have? Andy, I don't know if Andy is your real name, because, well, it could be Andrea. I love the background, so I'm picking on you just because of the background. So anything you'd like to share about anything you've heard today because you have a cool background?
You're so nice to compliment that. And I hope and pray it's not backwards. I've been trying to get it right, and the mirror my image thing. And oh my gosh. So hopefully everybody can read it properly. So I'm with Friends First. We actually partnered with West Gen in Denver about 5-6 years ago with Mary Cipollone. So that was kind of my connection to Generation Network Schools, or Schools Network, sorry. Friends First does, partner programming, SEL programming, mentoring, and another program called Project AIM. So anyway, I just wanted to learn, and this has been so interesting, and I really appreciate all that you do, and your work is so important. So thank you for letting me join. Also, Craig Spencer was a neighbor of mine, and actually his daughter was one of my students some years ago when I was a middle school teacher. So we had that good connection this week when he saw my name on the list. And so anyway, just wish you all the best.
Well, thanks, Andy. And as soon as I mentioned your background, anybody that was on now went to a black screen. So it's like, whether you're in 6th grade or you're an educator, it's all the same behaviors. So, but cool background. So I see on the chat box that most of you, and that makes me feel very good because you don't have to do that. I know your time is incredibly valuable. And so to see that, hey, this was enough to whet my appetite, I'd like to see the materials. That's the key thing. Because again, Generation Schools Network is most interested in helping you be able to navigate the next 3 years so that when we come out on the other side, it's not the same old, but you're also sustainable in moving forward. And so we believe in being a partner and not a vendor. And so we hope these tools are helpful, and that if you want us to reach back out to you and help you facilitate your conversations, we'd be happy to do that. Kirk, anything final thoughts?
No, I think we covered it, but I just again want to thank you all for the great work you're doing. We know it was a very difficult year, and we appreciate all you're doing for your communities and your kids. So thank you.